soon. Joining me now is correspondent for The Upshot at the New York Times, Josh Barrow, and Washington bureau chief, brightening our day here in Manhattan for BuzzFeed, John Stanton. Okay, so this is what I'm seeing as I read the landscape, John. This is actually really good for Democrats. It allows the president to go out there and say, they don't do anything but call me names. And by the way, the DCCC tells NBC News that on Wednesday it raised over $500,000 from more than 27,000 online donations, 8,000 of which were first-time donors. Why do Republicans think this is a good strategy?
Well, I think it gives them, to a certain degree, gives them cover, right? I mean, if you look at immigration, they've not wanted to do anything since much the election. It's been clear that they weren't going to do anything.
Since February, yes.
Right. You know, and this gives them the ability to say, well, look, the reason we're doing this is because we can't trust the president. He's got all this overreach. We're trying to break that so that we can force him to be somebody that we can believe is an honest partner. And that gives them cover, frankly, for that. It also gives Democrats a lot of political hay to make, right? I mean, like, they're raising money on this. They can then go out there and say this is a horrible thing. They're trying to attack the president, and they don't want to do anything good. And I think this really works both, frankly, well for both.
But I feel like if it's a seesaw, it definitely favors Democrats. I mean, also because history shows us, Josh, that when you try and impeach a president in a second term in a midterm election, it usually doesn't work out so well for House Republicans.
Well, but I think that's exactly the thing. I think Boehner's under a lot of pressure to take the fight to the president. You had the South Dakota Republican Party, for example, voting for this resolution saying Republicans should impeach the president. Ted Cruz saying that they should impeach Eric Holder if he does various things. Michelle Bachmann saying, you know, defund the executive branch, whatever that means. So this is a way for...
Whatever that means could be an addendum to anything Michelle Bachmann says, but I digress.
So this is a way for Boehner, I think, at fairly low political cost to go out there and say, see, I'm taking the fight to the president. We're going to sue him. We don't know what that means either, and lawsuits take a long time. They can ride this all the way out through the election, and Boehner can point to this and say...
Well, that's the only saving grace, I think, is that it actually can't come to fruition. Because I just think, and John, you cover Capitol Hill, every time Boehner sort of suggests the nuclear, there are members of the House Republican caucus that are like, yes, the nuclear option, take us to the edge of the fiscal cliff, impeach the president. They are not cowed by the primaries that we have all just witnessed. They are, I think, as restive and fomenting as much sort of, fractious behavior as they possibly can. To open the door to impeachment would just seem to be playing with fire.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's probably hoping that this will keep them quiet long enough to get sort of past that. Once they, like, after this election, he can say, look, he's out of here in 2 years in impeachment. This was like with Democrats that started to say we should try to impeach Bush. You know, when they got to 2006 and Pelosi took over and she was like, there's 2 years left. Let's just sort of let this lie. We'll beat him up and use him as a foil for the next election, but that's it. I think he's hoping he can get to that place, you know.
John brought up the point that a lot of this is smokescreen for Republicans' inaction on immigration. And I guess I wonder here, Josh, if you think the timing of this lawsuit is really specifically linked to waiting for the president to hand down whatever executive action he's going to hand down on deportations so that they have their ducks lined up to say, see, and here it is, yet again, the president's over.
Well, I mean, that's already happened with the president choosing not to deport, effectively trying to do what he can to mimic the DREAM Act through his executive powers. But it's not just immigration. It's, you know, conservatives are upset about the EPA rules on carbon. They're upset about all sorts of things in Obamacare implementation. And the president has gotten brushed back by the Supreme Court just in the last few weeks on a couple of those things. The Supreme Court slightly weakened the EPA rules on carbon. And the Supreme Court threw out his appointments, his recess appointments, when he was saying the Senate was out of session. And the Supreme Court basically said, no, if the Senate says
because if you gavel in for 30 seconds, apparently that means you're at work. If only I could do a 30 seconds of a television show and say that I was at work. But anyway.
So I think, you know, I think this is, it's a part of a broader agenda where Republicans are saying the president's trying to do these various bad things where we're trying to stop him. I think on those issues, Republicans aren't trying to pretend that they have a positive agenda. Those are issues where they're saying to their base, we're stopping the president's negative agenda. Now, I do think the Republicans have a problem with not having an economic agenda to discuss that they are pushing, you know, that is a positive agenda. But on immigration, I think Republicans want to do nothing. I think they think their best political option right now is to do nothing. So I don't think this is excuse-making on immigration for them.
I want to ask you about the Democrats. Chuck Schumer said yesterday, if they don't bring any bill to the floor, referring to the Republicans and Speaker Boehner, the president has choice on a humanitarian basis and on a policy basis to act where he can on his own. Congressman Luis Gutierrez, who we had on the show earlier this week, gave a red card saying the time for waiting is over. The president needs to act. The White House has delayed Jay Johnson's announcement on deportation policy or any amendment to it because they want more time, precisely because there is this humanitarian crisis. So my question to you, John, is what explains this rift between Democrats in Congress, who are saying the president must act, and the White House, which seems to be trying to buy some time while it stanches the bleeding on the border?
You know, I think what it is actually it works quite well together, because I think the Democrats are putting the pressure sort of on Obama, but is really getting reflected back onto Republicans. And he keeps saying, well, I'm going to wait, I'm trying to be reasonable, even though they've known for 6-8 months that this was never going to happen. But he wants to be able to go into the election, into the real sort of run-up to it in the next couple of months, and go to Latino voters and say, look, I did everything I could to work with these guys. I tried very hard, and now I did this, you know, 2 months before the election or 3 months before the election, so it's fresh in everyone's mind, and this is what Democrats
You think it's
wanted.
tied to the mint? Because I wonder, I mean, just talking to advocates, you know, folks who call this man the deporter-in-chief, there is real frustration. You know this. You've been to the border. You've met with the deported. That the White House has waited too long. It's not just about buying time and getting that sort of amended policy handed down a couple months before the midterms. It's like people want the president to act. I mean, I guess I wonder whether there is, I mean, truly pressure and true frustration with this White House when they say it's time to act.
Yeah,
I think the advocates are dissatisfied, but when you look at the vote numbers, I mean, the president did extremely well with Latino voters and Asian voters in 2012, and however frustrated they may be with the president, they're much more frustrated with Republicans. And so I think the problem for immigration advocates is that this issue works politically for Democrats either way. Either they get substantively what they want on immigration reform, and that pleases their base, and over time it also creates more Democratic voters, or they don't get what they want, and they blame the Republicans accurately for the fact that they didn't get what they want, and that strengthens their position with voters who care a lot about immigration, principally Hispanic voters. So that, I think, takes some of the political pressure off Democrats to actually get immigration done. Now, that said, I don't think that we're in a position where immigration reform would get done if Democrats didn't want it as a political issue. I think the reason we don't have immigration reform is House Republicans do not want to pass immigration reform.
Tell me, I won't call you the sage of Capitol Hill because that's what I call Luke Russert. King of Capitol Hill. John, is the plan for Republicans to get immigration reform done ahead of 2016? I mean, is there a plan at this point?
No, there's not a plan. I mean, I think some of them would like to see that, but, you know, I think part of the reason Boehner really did nothing after he came out in February and sort of made noises like he was going to was that the pushback was too hard. And unless they lose a bunch of those members, which I don't think they're going to, I don't see how they're going to get that done in 2016.
So they're like feasibly never going to do immigration reform. Is this what we're like facing?
Well, most Republicans say that they think that what's going to happen is they're going to go into 2016, the Latino vote is going to definitely give the presidency to the Democrats, and at that point, you may finally be able to force Republicans in the House into acting on something they don't want to do, but they don't think it's going to happen before that.
That's insane. Basically punitive incentive. You're going to lose so bad, it's going to hurt so bad that finally you will see the error of your ways.
I mean, immigration is this weird issue in that we talk about the power of money in politics and the power of elite opinion in politics, and there's basically no well-organized opposition to immigration. There's no big lobby against it. Business and labor are both very strongly in favor of it, and yet it keeps not happening. And that's because the voting base behind the Republican Party really does not want it to happen, even though a lot of the people who give a lot of money to Republican candidates are in favor of it. And that's what we saw with the only really successful Tea Party insurgency candidate against a Republican in Congress was one that had no money behind it. It just had the energy of people who hated the idea of immigration reform. And that is what I think stops it. And that's why I think there's a long-range plan about when it eventually
gets
stopped.
That is what we call a very bad, a tent with flaps that have been open to perhaps too many audience members. That was such a convoluted metaphor. I'm going to leave it there and stop talking. Josh Barrow and John Stanton, guys, great to see you. Thanks for your time. After the